Hello, Ms. Ferguson. Here's my reflection for the Hydrate or Dihydrate Lab. And I'm hopefully going to try to keep it under 10 minutes. This is my issue. I keep talking longer than I'm supposed to, so I do apologize. Anyways, let's go into the experimental design and any of my data that we found. So for starters, before we even get into that, I want to briefly talk about why we did this and what we're trying to determine. So we're trying to determine which liquids are going to be able to enter the cell at the faster rate, or which ones are going to be able to rehydrate that cell after it's been in the area of dehydration. So what's going to replenish that cell the fastest? And that, whoever is able to do that, that would make it a suitable drink to use after you've worked out or you've done something that requires physical activity and you need a quick hydrate. Like, what's the best thing to use? That's what we're trying to determine. With that, we set this lab up to have a foam membrane, and to ensure our data was at least amount of skewed or as simple as can be, the three things we had to keep in mind was temperature, which we tried to keep consistent. Obviously some up and down, you can't keep the room same the whole time, but for the most part we can say that it's consistently around room temp, 70-ish degrees. 2 is pressure, would be stay consistent as well, and time. We tried to keep time, it should have been about 30 minutes for each one. Now, going back to the actual experiment itself. So we basically use faux membranes is what I've been calling them, because it's made out of dialysis tubing, because I think it'd be pretty hard to get an actual membrane in here. But it's trying to replicate that barrier that an actual membrane would have, which in our case would be permeable. And obviously it doesn't have the polar head and the non-polar tails, but it acts very similar in the sense it would control what's able to go in and out of this membrane, kind of like an actual membrane would do. For example, water is very interesting because it's polar, and but it's small, so it can go through the membrane itself, where others that are polar might not be able to do that. But also, what makes it interesting too is it has something called an aquaporin, which is a channel protein which allows the water to easily go through the membrane. But it can go both ways. Some are not able to go through at all. Some can go through the membrane because they're small. Those components it's easier to go through. Others, they might be ions, so they're not able to go through the membrane whatsoever. They actually need a channel protein to go through. So there's a little background information there, which I'm sure you know, but don't worry. Okay, going back to my experiment. So again, we have this dialysis tubing to act as that membrane, and we basically weighed each one to determine what their mass was before we put them in the liquid to see if they would stay the same, would they go up, would they go down, who knows. And after we weighed them, we put each of them in their cup. And here is where we get the different ORSs. In our case, we had Pedialyte. There was 2 others though. And then the control, which is water, which we did 1 water and 4 Pedialytes. Now, why was the control water, you might be asking? Well, the control was water because if you think about it, the human body is 70% water. We are literally just mainly water. More than half of us is water. And with that being said, when we lose that water, our cells are therefore dehydrated. We need to rehydrate them with something. So, are you rehydrating your body, rehydrating yourself with Pedialyte or water? It's water. You're lacking water, you need the water. That's what you're doing. We need water on a daily basis to live, to strive as people. We know, I'm sorry, I hate to break it to some people, but you can't survive off 5 Cokes a day and replacing water with that. You know what I mean? So you need water to survive. Your body needs water, your cells need water. They need that aqueous environment to sustain life. So that's kind of why the water was in control. Sorry, I'm gonna speed this up. Anyways, after that, we placed them each in their into their containers, and one into a separate container. Those 4 were filled with Pedialyte, and then the other one was filled with water. We left, set the timer for 30 minutes for each one about, hopefully, in those timelines, came back. And we have to dry them off, which is very important because you do not want any excess liquid on there because it could skew your data. After it was dried, we could determine the weight afterwards, or the mass afterwards, and see if it had gained or lost value, or maybe even stayed the same. Alrighty, so we had ORS1, as I stated. And in trial 1, we had negative 1.3. And what does negative mean, you might be asking? Well, it's quite an interesting number because it means it's lost mass. It means that the liquid did not even go in, it actually went out into the solute around it, which is not a good thing, which means it's doing the exact opposite of what we want. The other ones were fairly successful. Trial 2 was 1.1, trial 3 was 0.8, trial 4, interesting enough, was 0, which means there was no movement in or out of the cell, and trial 5 was 0.7. So that 1.1, 0.8, and 0.7 are essentially saying that, okay, we have movement of water from outside the cell going into the cell where there is a lack of water. All right, let's move on. Nuanced strengths and weaknesses based on actual results. So the results were interesting, to say the least, because we don't clearly have a clear winner in simple terms. You know, we look at this data and all the percent errors are very aligned with each other, especially these ORS2, 3, and control, or the water. Actually, ORS1 was the least successful if you look at it. So ours was not very good at hydrating the human cell. And what makes it nuanced, though, is that there isn't that clear taker. You know, it's the control. You have the ORS3 and the ORS2. I mean, the ORS3 does have the smallest error bar, but for the most part, again, there isn't that clear difference between any of them. And what makes this so nuanced is not that it isn't consistent. I mean, like, when I say it isn't consistent, it's in the sense that, again, you have some that are really high and some that are really low. I think the most consistent ones on here is probably ORS3 and ORS1, actually. And ORS2 we see as low here between a 0 to a 2 to as high as a 4 and a 6, you know. And even water is very all over the place. You know, again, some as low as like a 1 and some as high as a 7, let's say, estimating there. So we have a lot of differences between what each liquid was able to do. Some worked well, some did not work well. So I did find that quite interesting when I was looking at my data. So I think that kind of is showing that there isn't a distinct, clear best hydrator. But the issue is that because the water wasn't necessarily drastically higher or lower, it's still going to be the best one to replenish you. I mean, it makes sense. We are water. Again, the median lines fall off in each other. It's kind of no consistency within it. So I think there is that kind of nuance that there isn't really a defined one that's like sticks out immediately to you, you know? So I think that's kind of the nuance to it. Okay, concentrating ingredients. Okay, I think I kind of touched on this earlier. So I think to talk about concentrating ingredients, you have high to low. So you go from an area where there's a lot of this molecule. Let's say in this case it's water. And there's an area where there's not much of that water. It's going to move from that high to low, which is passive transport, where there's no ATP required. Now when you go to low to high, it's a little different because it's called active transport, and in the name active, there's work that needs to be done in this. And ATP is therefore required. ATP is usually for larger or charged/polar cells that need to enter the membrane because it's not able to just go through like a water cell could. You're going to need that protein channel to allow it to go in and out and move it through because it just can't go through on its own. It's too big to move on its own. And going to our experiment, we're mainly going to see that high to low because if you think about it, the cell, there's not much in there. It's most likely what you would call, hold on, let me go look quickly. I don't want to it goes up. Okay, in this case, our cells are hyperatomic. They're shriveled up, they're small, they have nowhere to go, all the water will go out of them, right? And we need to replenish it. And what's outside of it? A high concentration of water and whatever else is in that solute, like salt, sugar, etc. You can get rid of. And because of that, we're going to have passive transport back into the hypertonic cell, which hopefully we're going to balance that into the isotonic area, or we're getting equal in and out, in and out, kind of like a little circle. We also don't want hypotonic. Plants, this is okay because they can regulate this. Human cells, no, because they will, and we don't want that either. So you really want to hit the isotonic where it's an equal kind of balance, not either opposite. Right now we're in a hypertonic state. We need the solute to go into the cell. We need that passive transport from the high concentration to the low concentration. Now, let's go back to the outlier real quick. Negative 1.3. This means it's going down, which is a skewed data, which seems to be the opposite. In this case, it would just be active transport. It's going from an area of low to high. Simple as that. Okay. Areas of improvement. I know it's a briefing class, so I don't think it's too long. I think the only issue was the timing on this. I get that it was a weird situation of like a weekend, you don't really overnight. I also understand. But I feel that 30 minutes was long enough. Yes, could we see change? Could we see that there was subtle movements, like 0.2, 0.3, a little more? but you don't see a drastic difference. You know, like, is that just happened to me, or if it's longer, would it have changed that? Would it be negative? Would it be zero? Would it continue to be positive? Bigger, bigger, bigger. So I think more time would have just allowed us to see bigger differences in that data and allow us to collect more accurate data. I think 30 minutes is just so quick of a time where we're not really getting the best out of the lab that we could be. And yeah, again, there's no clear difference in solutions. I think because of this, like, in the end, a lot of solutions, especially ORS 2, 3, and the control, were very, extremely similar to each other via the findings. I mean, ORS 1 would change a lot. And again, would ORS 1 be able to change a lot? Maybe more time to soak. And I guess the best way to put this is, sorry for making it a little down here, but it's kind of like cars, right? Think of maybe ORS 3. Maybe ORS 3 is the car made for track performance. It's meant to take the tight corners, it has nice, it has the aerodynamics, it has the lower to the ground, like you're close, it's built for track, it's a beautiful car, right? And then you have a car that's a little different. It's meant for the quarter mile, it has a quick takeoff, it has the elevator, you don't need it to be low and the tight, you don't need that, right? ORS 3 here, at the quarter mile, it looks bad. This is kind of how it is. The quarter mile doesn't look good. It gets beat. Is it still fast? Yes, but it still gets beat by the car meant to do that short, quick thing. Do you know what I mean? So I guess what my point is here is that we don't really get the ORS 3 that opportunity to take track. We don't get to see it, take the tight corners, take the 2 mile straightaway. We don't get to see the opportunities that you might see in like a 2 to 4 to 8 hour time period, like in these cells now. So there's that. Okay. So I'm looking at my question to do this. Okay. Hey, Miss Ferguson, I'm finishing the rest of my hydrate or dihydrate lab reflection, and just going to do a few more things that I kind of missed out. Hopefully, again, make this quick. So just examples of data I really wanted to go over. I think I touched on this briefly, but hypertonic versus hypotonic, and essentially with this, okay, hypotonic is essentially when there's water going into the cell, too much water going into the cell specifically, where it's going to expand too much and kind of pop, would be the best way to describe it. When H2O leaves, it kind of shrivels up, going back into that. And again, isotonic is that kind of equal flow, everything's nice, everything's great. Now, data. How do we know if it's hypo versus hypertonic? Great question. Great question. So if we look at our data points, we have areas of negative and we have areas of positive. Now when it's negative, that means H2O is leaving the cell. And when it's leaving the cell, this means that it's hypertonic. So if it's negative, it's hypertonic. Now if it's going into the cell, depending on the situation, it could be deemed hypo or isotonic. If it's hypo, if it's going in, it's totally hypo because the water is going from the outside to the inside of the cell, so it's hypotonic. And yes, I know isotonic is a little different because you want that equal balance of H2O leaving, kind of like a circular thing, motion of what's happening. But for the most part, we can agree that water is entering the cell in this case because there has been a replenishment of water. And again, this has also been touched on briefly, but I'll bring it up again, is the percent error in the mean. So it shows the overall percent change between the different ORSs. So overall, what's the average percent? Like which one has, you know, if it has the highest average, it's going to be the best hydrator. And again, this is going to that nuanced situation where there really isn't a best hydrator because all those percent errors are not in, there isn't a greatest one. They're all very equal of each other other than the ORS one. So essentially all this means is that there isn't really a best hydrator. And I mean, out of all the options, you're better off just choosing water, frankly. That's all that's kind of saying there. And then going with that, and the other thing we should touch on is osmosis, and that kind of goes back, and I mean osmosis is kind of the big umbrella term for hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic. It just is the free-flowing motion of water in between the cell, and I think that's kind of the main thing what we're trying to figure out here, you know, like is it going from high solvent to low solvent, so low water to high water, or we're going to actually, sorry, very high back. Osmosis is just the flow of water, and typically it's going to be going from area of low concentration to a high concentration of water, and it's usually going from area of high concentration of solute to a low concentration of water. So that's kind of different. So we want low water, high solute to, oh my mistakes. We want low water with a large amount of solute. We want to take an area where there's a large amount of water and a little amount of solute, and hopefully get it to counterbalance this and get that equal flow so it's isotonic. That's essentially what that's saying with osmosis. Again, brief touch there. Trying to keep this quick. We have a lot to go still. Okay, you don't want to oversimplify this. I think it's risky for this, and it can be easily oversimplified because it's like, okay, drink stuff and you're gonna get hydrated. That's the base level. No, that's not the case. There's good hydrators and there's bad hydrators. As we can see, Pedialyte was not a good hydrator. It did not enter the cell fast and not get its job done. Do not use it if you're dehydrated, especially in a vital time. You have to know how the cells work and how water moves through the cells to have a basic understanding of the fact that just drinking something isn't going to hydrate you. So, if you only are accounting for the liquid entering the cell membrane, but when you account for that, if you just account for that part, it's fine, but cells are much more complicated and nuanced than just the membrane. There's more to it, Again, kind of going back, if you have too much, the cell could expand or pop. And with cells, it's not just like water goes in and it's fine. You want equal movement between the water. You don't want too much, again, it'll pop, too little, it'll shrivel up. You don't want either of those. And that's what makes cells very difficult, is you want that perfect balance where it's equal going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, which is isotonic. You want to achieve that. And with that too, it's like going back to the topic of how not every cell could just, or not every molecule could just go in and out of the cell membrane. There's certain things it has to follow. Water just can't magically appear in there. It has to go through certain processing. It has to go through the membrane or through an aquaporin. So that in itself, there's a lot to counteract there. And there's a lot to take into account when you're thinking about, okay, what's going to hydrate me the best, because cells are very particular of what they need and what they don't need. And lastly, to kind of go into is the marketing portion. So, marketing is very interesting because you want to appeal to consumers. You want to get them right off the bat. This is going to hydrate you quick and fast. Yes, this is what you want. You want this. And unfortunately, saying that water is going to do that isn't going to help your brand. Let's face it. I can go get water from my tap if I really wanted to, and I can drink it for just about free. I don't need to go to the store. So why should I buy your products? What makes your product more appealing to me than other products? And that's where, there's a lot of things that go into it, marketing, and I'm not the most knowledgeable person on this, but from a personal aspect, is that if I'm going to want something from a product, I want trustworthiness. I want to know what I'm drinking is what I'm actually drinking. And honestly, having science to back up something where you need science as a consumer, even if I don't get the science to the degree that they're doing, having a basic understanding that, oh, this is going to help me, this is like they're doing stuff to actually find ways to achieve the best hydrator is appealing for me as a consumer. I'm going to want to go buy that drink that's been scientifically proven to actually be beneficial to my body compared to Pedialyte, which is not beneficial. And as we see like this increase of deaths between especially with athletes with having these issues, and as someone myself who's gone through heat stroke, it's a horrible thing to experience. It's like your body. I remember, not to be TMI here, but I remember it was throwing up, my head hurt, and I couldn't. I remember for life of me, I could not cool down. Like I was about to go to the hospital. I remember, I sat in the cold shower and I was still hot afterwards. And that's why it's so important, one, to keep yourself fueled beforehand. Make sure you have that liquid in you before you even go play, and continue to hydrate, because you can lose it quick like that, and you have to be able to replenish your body as fast as possible. And I think with this rise of that in death in athletes with heat stroke, already it's going to be appealing what's going to hydrate me the best. And this is a little bit of a stretch, but athletes, who's your main person who you want to outreach to, that equals brand deals of athletes who are going to promote your drink. Okay, we got steps ahead here. And being realistic, obviously we do not make an objectively better drink. There isn't a better drink out there that we've made. We don't have something better than what's already on the market, or water. But when something is, going back to, when it's backed by science, and we can use science to determine what's good versus not, and use our trials and errors to make an even better drink in the future, as a customer, I can put my trust that, hey, not only have they failed, but they're going to take their failures and use them to find success. And that's what matters. It doesn't have to be today, but as long as we find success with what we're doing, that's what matters. And I think having that room of growth is a lot different than other companies, that they're only focusing on money. And yes, it's a big part of owning a business. You need money to operate. But as a consumer, when I see more than just, restocking the shelves with mediocre product versus actually trying to find a hydrator that works, I want to see that as a consumer. Anyways, to conclude this, I've learned so much from this lab. It's been a great experience, great opportunity. I think it's really solidified my idea of the membrane and how that functions. So thank you so much, Ms. Ferguson.